당은 가서 저기다 미다바세 디고 쉬버래 다 미다바세 당은 저 기디네 아니 균주고 된 직도야지요 말해서는 줄야 아니 직에 시위 게로지 망보여래서 아니 그시 게나 마체바지 되베네 로jal하스마도 되토야요 말해서 아니 시로그래지래 다지고 라오메 발레다 녀모 온기 아니 시루고레스 아니 시베나 아니 가르시도데 갑라 가르여레스네 소수게 남긴네 안 수보디 대하나 냠도 캐려야 줘요 말해 아니 소수기 제기 규절하다 아니 변조 간수네 디세님도 캐려야 말해 디메반자 아니 소수기 분자다 년다 아니 지기 소수기 기회신이라서 디세나 님도 쳐야요 말했어 메반자다 소수 지부마도 시를 소수 지부 줘야 돼서 지나다 수수이나 소수 지부 줘야 돼 제가 디네 면자다 안주기 체딜이야 튕기나 변조나 직년도다 배 조고 같이 옆에네 시리 갑라 아니 디 티르야 메바서 개와 치말라 대수기 그냥 아주 팽겨 말했어 안다 가르요레스네 아주기 다데 개와 같이 주베네 개와 자와 같이 주베네 디셈이때도 아니 뉴바디 셈이때도 샤고라 제자디 셈네 마트로디 디념도 다 개와 자와디 주고 개와디 주고 그래서 제자디네 잔티 개와디 개와 치말이야 아주 안디지 디기투 디기요야야 안디기 제고 민자 디기 용고래 해서 가사 디고랑 아주 쉬버려.
Good morning. Yesterday we spoke on a number of topics, but primarily that of impermanence. And impermanence in particular in relation to this life. This life is fleeting. Not only does it pass by so quickly, its length is not particularly long. The very longest one can hope for is 100 years. But for all of us though, the attainment of such a lifespan is far from certain, because there are so many causes that can lead to an untimely death, an unexpected death, and there are so few that can sustain life. So therefore, not only is our death certain, but our time of death and our manner of death, this is hidden to us, it's unknown to us. And at the time of our death, our body that has accompanied us throughout this life is left behind. We cannot take it with us, nor our possessions. There's not a single one, no matter how valued, that we can take with us. Nor our loved ones, nor our teacher. None can accompany us from this life into the next. We travel alone into our next life. Moreover, our possessions, friends, and so forth of this life, not only are they left behind, once we've left this life, they cannot benefit us, they cannot aid us at all. But what does accompany us from this life into the next is the imprints that we've accumulated. The imprints from both wholesome deeds as well as unwholesome ways of thinking. These are accumulated on our consciousness and they travel with us from life to life. This is what accompanies us. Recognizing then that our way of thinking, the karma that we create, that this is all that will accompany us into our future lives, we come to see that as of great value, of great importance, as opposed to this life's relations and possessions, which will all be left behind. And therefore, we turn to apply ourselves to strive in cultivating wholesome imprints and eradicating unwholesome ways of thinking. This is the purpose of the meditation on impermanence. Moving into the next verse, following from the meditation on impermanence, we come to the 8th verse. rather than continuing to forsake your future lives through the constant and incessant struggle of the pointless activities of this one life, you need to think about the causes of suffering.
아니네 디시고와 세치마 펜체 뢰다네 뇌메비게 세디 자와라스 나 뒤긴체 메버 베바디 있어데 다 직숨념도이나 그래서 당한 주게 세델이야 가르치고래서네 세치마 펜체 뢰다네 세디다 깨워치마다 탈바다 깨워치마 하다 미고와 토백에 삼람마다 와제 안디야참 안 탈바다 뇨모바 탐제 밤에 탈베고바 토야다 산제고바 니한 삼람 마땅하지 지산 디 삼람 마땅하자 디 토백에 된다라 자와 베주치고마 디차사 삼마다죠 뢰다네 바샤샤제 안가 저 가르치 왔은 뇌메베 세디 자와라 세디 세디기 디디점기 다 뇌메바세디 다 깨워치마다 탈바다 탐제 kim을 토백이 된다 닝보 디소 마임버게 세디기 디기 참 루베기 된다라 안저기 디디체도 안에 튕긴 주야당 안지기 제가 레가로스 마서네 그디나 지고래 균체메 발베바디스 그디나도 무디제 지고래 저래다.
Looking at the first three lines together, rather than continuing to forsake your future lives through the constant and incessant struggle of the pointless activities of this one life. This is continuing or building on the theme of this text thus far, that up to this point, our mental process, our focus, our attention has been primarily, if not solely, on achieving and experiencing this life's pleasures, and therefore all our activities are motivated merely by overcoming problems of this life and thereby to experience happiness in this life. That has been our sole focus. The outcome of having this life's pleasures solely as our sole focus is that these activities that we've been engaging in, so not just the physical activity, but also verbal and the thought process behind, has no great meaning, is in the wider context of the expanse of time, can be seen as pointless, having no great meaning at all. And therefore, because we have remained under this veil of confusion of focusing just on this one life, in effect we have abandoned our future lives, in that we have not given thought to accumulating the required causes to ensure good rebirth, or the causes for liberation and enlightenment. And in this way, we have ended up forsaking our future lives.
세디장장기 돈달라 삼나제 레가장장 제디 세디장장기 디기주에기다 동아세 디장장 삼다에디 삼르데 노트리스 다 가사에디 디되서디에디 노트리스 삼르데 노트리스 디자 디고 말해지 지산 디 삼르데 가서 노트리스 직 어자트 지고래 안다 다는 가르쳐오래라나 세디장양 디 세딜야 튕긴 주야다 디기주에 동아세데 자와레가 제고 디디 조치교 말에 조디 가서는 탈바다 템지 기벽고 뭐 토야게 된다 조지 디토에 된다라 아니 그 배주지고래 해서지 된다 인보디 디스고래.
By this point in the text, when we'll have come to the recognition that focusing solely on this life's happiness and thereby our mental energy and all our physical and verbal activities focused just on overcoming the mere problems of this life and having this very narrow, confined perspective, this is mistaken. This has been covered in the preceding verses. So in the reflections, this will be becoming apparent to one. One will have gained this recognition. So here, we are being urged to shift our focus to raise our gaze, to develop a broader perspective, and certainly a far-sighted perspective. Not being and replacing this focus on this life's happiness solely to thinking about primarily our future lives this great expanse of time that lies before us. Put our focus there, and in terms of accumulating the causes for liberation and enlightenment in particular.
mi sosogi digi dubye dondalia jawa lega mara naso chigorwa kashi ge dabne chige semje nyasimya da dene ge semje jang de sochue cheche di thone an sosogi tunggen dubya da dunga seya da digi dubya tunggen ju고 di tunggen di semje di thone an do chene an chig tabshi da jene sochue ge lega jang cheche an do soso digi dubya da tunggen di thone lega jang chigorwa 당저기 아니 가시네 안지 미고하다야다 미시 잘하고마자야다 고하다지 아니 지소수기 튕긴 주야다 데니선에 디기 주야다 소수기 세디기 디기 주야게 삼다제 아니 튕긴 주야야 아니 디탑람들이야 아니 지고하다야다 고모고야다 고소리선제다 데니 중고로와 디레고를 아니야 찍네 아직은 저게 소수기 디기 주야야 튕긴 고고래다 튕긴 주야야 되네 지가 저게 때가돼야다 되네 그 코리올이야 지금 뇌기래 균에 삼마다 제가 어디 튕기 되네 아니 지 튕긴 주야 지금 거로와 아직네 아직 소수기 디기 주야야 동아시아의 디기 주야야 다 만줄이야 디기 말아간 아주 바치지게 균체 건조기 뇌기 섬제 대리야 좀 마잡지 같이파 떨좀 제대 매버선 지거로와 다 디쳐서 제 디쳐서 가르치고 그러시는 세디기 소속이 디기 주비하다 동화세계 don달치고 그래. 제가 디 삼로디 되니게 제제 내가 가르치고 그러시는 이번에 소제지는 샹래 소홀래 소 죄디게 삼로 공로 채와집에 삼로 안 지금 아래 개변에 샹이 좀제 샹래 채와집에 삼로 안 구모고네 샹이 잘라디게 소소 초야게 소소 라야드 삼로 어디 삼로디게 노트리에서 다디 삼로디게 노트리에서 세상 아주 미지코론이야 되는 이제는 두 제변에 디수 삼로디게 노트리에서 세상 아주 저기 소수기 디기 주비하다 체디 잠기 디기 주비하 동아세게 삼다지 되네게 내가 삼로 되네시 케제 되네게 삼로도 샹리아 체위에 삼바다 샹라 뇌베 삼비 군에 나제 다 내가 내야 돼 되네게 삼로 디게 쳐서 노르리 해서 그렇다
Here the crucial reflection is to look at both one's own life as well as what one has observed in one's own community and the world in general. And this reflection is based on the understanding that all beings are the same in wanting happiness and to be freed of suffering. And that is the motivation behind every physical activity and verbal activity and even thought, the wish for happiness, to be freed of suffering. But so whilst this is the case for all beings, whether humans or animals or unseen beings, in this meditation we just look at humans, bearing in mind this perspective that the motivating intent behind every act is to achieve happiness and to overcome problems. But it's veiled in this confused view of focus on this one life solely. And of the nearly 8 billion humans, almost all of them, for each and every act, has this as their motivation. The achievement of happiness in this one life and the overcoming of this life's problems. And that is the motivation for each and every physical act and verbal act and just mere trains of thought. So that's the basis of the reflection. Then under the influence of this limited view, this narrow view of achieving just this life's happiness, people have their thought processes, their verbal communication, and their physical activities. And they will engage in activities that to bring themselves happiness, and maybe their circle of close companions and loved ones. But this will involve taking advantage of others, often knowingly and willingly, but they'll justify it. Perhaps even harming others, taking life of animals, or engage in physical conflict, and certainly putting others at one's own service, whether physically or through manipulation, using others to serve one's own needs. And this is all justified in society. This is how society works. Here the key point is to recognize the motivation. And that is to achieve happiness and overcome problems in this one life. It's a narrow perspective. Because from this narrow perspective, all harm comes. All harm that we perceive follows from this. The environmental destruction that the earth is enduring, this comes from the desire from people to experience happiness in this life, to create material goods, to create material wealth, to have fame and good reputation from having a successful business. The environment is destroyed. Just reasons are used to justify it, but it all comes from this same motivation. All conflict that arises in our own minds of aggression and anger, and their expression of it, all conflict that we have been a part of, whether we are on the receiving end or the creating it, all conflict between communities or nations comes from the same motivation. Happiness for myself and my group in this life. The overcoming of problems and difficulties for myself and my group in this life. This mistaken way of thinking, this faulty method, cannot lead to lasting happiness. Yet, this is what motivates all of us in our activities, looking for happiness, but veiled by this confusion of looking at only this one life.
Control Savana, Sosugi, Miss Genda Yumdo, Control Dumbina, Control Chavana, and Sosugi, and Dumatiki, Sunkichi, Tuyobata, Sosugi, Dunda Tuyoba, Chizan Control Sana, Control Chavana, Sosugi, Legalmas, and Dunda Tuyobata, Control the Goyo, batting on some Dangorvada, Jedi Samnotiki, Noto Chagora, Control the Pena, now to give Shunchilia. Shungi, Lerechiki, Chiktonda, Matuba, Sosik Mimangi, Devomakan, Mimangi, Shundelia, Moloska, Wena, Chikondo Gilanche, Condo Chopchimolaging, the Condo Large, Molotjabna, Shungi Dunda, Tuture, some gen, Condo Large, Molotjab, and the Jig Kampa Meta Taya, Mota Meta Taya, Jimambo, Chola Taya, Chik Tell Gangamon, which Tigorua. Jizan, and Disum, and it Digi. And me, Shunlomola Jadish, Kampa Meta, that's in the new city, which Kondugi Digi, Kondugi Jeba, Tele, Tebu Delicacy, Jania, Jong Shuji Regorwa, Jong Ruchi. There were Kampa Meta, Mota Meta, and me, Nidon Diala Soba, the Denigi, and the Soktot and Missoyala Soba, the Bombodiki, Soyala Soba, the Ngurwa, Chizadi Kondugi Tebure, Chizadi Digo Mare. Chizandana, Chikshunlia, the Nigi Ton, Chitulin Chiwene. Control Masawache, so go Boba the Dembicone, Dembangu Tone, Dembaraje, Guyus, and Denigi, Tabzuchi, Jiggy, Molo Tabane, and Dunda Tugurwa. Denigi, you have no control Mabachine, Teme Shivi Tone, and Dembaraje, Molo Jabaina, and Dunda Tuguyobala, and the Kamba Meta, Mota. Chola, Emilia, and the Nukin Chevadi, the Yungomar. Says that I'm to get some money, Contra the boat, or Contra the Yena, so low chamber check, then so done down to Duma, say two good and because some of Yungorte in a near up the Chunji, Donado to a Yungorte, Pugiala sometimes, and Shania, Gangam, Dichel, and Socially Jangana, Droyata, Gangam, Butcher, the Ranshinika, Gangali, says that Dineza, this some of the Tanatiki, no go or essay, that was in a Dinama Raturus. Sungoriso.
As I've already described in this reflection, we see that the motivating intent behind every thought and resulting speech and physical activity is the wish for happiness in this life, accompanied by overcoming the problems of this one life. And this, in our reflection, looks specifically at the class of minds of anger. So whether it's from an annoyance and frustration to full-blown rage, whether it's arising in our continuum or that of anyone else, anger too comes from a wish for happiness. So this is good to reflect on because it seems counterintuitive. But when anger arises, we want to overcome our suffering and thereby achieve happiness by pushing someone away. We want things to go our way so that we can have happiness. So we are angry about a situation or another person. The desire for happiness in this one life is the motivation even for anger, for all thoughts. Many problems that come from this. In particular, afflictions in general confuse the mind even further, obscure wisdom. So let's say a large group of society are unhappy with the government policy. So they want the government policy to change, and therefore they protest to make their views heard. They're feeling ignored, and they want their views to be heard in a visible way. So there's a large gathering. They are protesting because they want policies to change, because they want happiness. Could even imagine two groups protesting separately with opposing views on the same topic. They both want happiness. But with through this desire of happiness for this one life, afflictions such as anger may well arise, and then protests can turn violent. And property is destroyed, cars are torched, buildings are set on fire, and physical violence towards usually the representatives of the state is enacted. And what benefit comes from this? What benefit comes from torching that car or that building or being in a violent confrontation with that individual? What benefit comes from that? What does happen, though, is that the protester may well be beaten in return, may well be imprisoned. And certainly the attitude of the authorities tends to harden. They perhaps now have an excuse to ignore the wishes of the protesters. So the fault here is not being against the government policy. The fault is not about protesting a government policy. The fault is having a limited intelligence, limited wisdom, thinking solely of this one life, therefore making it much easier for afflictions to arise. That is the fault. Rather, a skilled activist will have a far broader perspective. And with a far-sighted outlook, they will ensure they guard their mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions. They'll retain their strength of mind, their courage. This they'll retain. But they'll guard their mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions, and thereby, with wisdom, they will protest in a skillful manner, trying to gain cooperation from those who have those in authority, who can make the changes they seek. This is how they protest, with a far-sighted outlook. Therefore, no violence will follow. So this is a skillful way to think in general, in a way freed of the afflictions.
Chenle Cewe Sambada, Chenle Nube Samba, Denegi, Yomo Big Gunia Laji, Denegi Jawa Chebaina, and the Garras do some Tavena, that Tamatilla, Lunando Chona, Dunga Yus. Chesan do some Tavena, Deso and Jawa Cheta, the Gunlong Katiku do sometime. Deso, Cewe Samba, the Shala Nube Sambig Tone, Jawa, Candis Dubina, Denegi Jevana, Nube Samba, Cewe Samba Coron, Yomo Bare, di Tipasedire. 제가 디기 되고 뭐 받나 가서 누가레스 제가 누가 연구를 누가 유레스 되니기 나중에 세배 삼배 돈에 신 소주 제바다 신 두수 제배는 개와 치마랑 가지고 누가 녀이가 손을 끼고 누가 연구를 그래서 제가 또 심지어 야고서 삼다면 세 디기 제 취미게 달바다 탐지기 뭐 개와 치마 하다 미고 와토에 삼는 마다와시 치디장장게 자와지에게 디기도 누가 세게 된다라 아니면 세배 삼배 군에 나지 내가 제반에 세배 삼배 호로 동아리에서 동아유규리에서 맞으데 론 되네게 삼다바이나 론나도 쳐나 동아유 디소리에서.
The verse concludes with, you need to think about the causes of suffering. So here, Gendün Gyatso is specifically pointing out to us, be aware of your motivation, your intent behind every physical action, verbal communication, and stream of thought. Be aware of your intent. One has the wish to benefit. The wish for happiness can be aligned to the wish to benefit, at least oneself. But this cannot come at the expense of others. It cannot come at the expense of harming oneself either. Having a motivation to achieve happiness cannot be influenced by the wish to harm, because to the extent that it is, it will not achieve the desired outcome. So developing the wish for happiness, but with the determination not to harm others, is essential, and not allowing ourselves to be confused, deluded by the mind that justifies harmful action. And how not to be so confused and to justify harmful action is to have a long-term view, the thinking beyond this life. This is a wide and expansive mind, being aware that I may get what I want now, but if it's at the expense of others, this is going to create negative karma, and this will create even more problems in future lives. So therefore, I need a longer-term view, a little bit more patience, and more skill. And in this way, we can engage in our activities free from the afflictions. Moving now to the 9th verse, which is clearly looking directly or explicitly at future lives. Pits of fire that are extraordinarily difficult to endure, in hells that will be the home in which you must remain for an age. Right now, are you not exerting yourself in the activities that will make such suffering a reality?
Digi nyawa sede kan shore sene da nyawa chanya da chanya da dinege da jik mangbo chik sungor jiza manzu de tonggo mardi ina da din shore sungor wa da.
Samsaric existence is experienced in different forms of rebirth. It's most generally presented as 6 different realms of rebirth, and these can be subdivided into those which are higher and those which are lower, or those which are where happiness is greater and those where happiness is rare or doesn't even exist. So we find ourselves in the higher realms, born as a human, and there are the higher realms of God realms, where they're called higher because there's greater happiness than or transitory happiness than in the human realm. So there are these, of the 6 realms, there are 3 higher realms, humans and realms of gods. Then there are the 3 lower realms of animals, and then unseen beings, spirits and hell realms. Within these realms, there are often many subdivisions. So within the hell realms, there are many subdivisions. A small division is the hot hells and the cold hells. These to us are all unseen, but are rebirths that follow from karma.
다데네 체수바르가에 매업수 세대 나냐와 청해세데 베 스코로 매시우지 바 매장양 바르게 매장야 바르게지 디나라야 안지경아 저기 깨바이나 냐와 청해세 깨바이나 데라야 안께도 한 뒤가베 바르데 내고 봤을 균중비 간래야 균 로망보 동자망보 디나래 되셔 동안용고 거래세데 그베 냐와 시시 데니기 냐와 냐유 동아세데 지게 빼가서 쇠발 까와래스도 되네 녀야를 빼 마시게다 동화 침부 쉬우지오래스 다디 녀를 뒤져봐지 숨바님 들어서다 녀위게다 녀와의 시지 동화에 간다 쉬어래스나 매우 녀위 창이 있어야 돼 다디나데 배천로 녀위 창이었어야 사제데 매 말투게지 다데네마 냐와 창이 디나 깨바이나 데야 로동타 마볼로 네가위 바디 네고 균디고 네고 고래 디네네베가블 동화데 빼 마시 슉 첨부 슈지 용거야 차고래지 냐외시지 동화데세
Pits of fire that are extraordinarily difficult to endure, in hells that will be the home in which you must remain for an age. So here, this is referring to explicitly just to the hell realms, in particular the hot hells. And the hell realms, a rebirth there is marked by continuous suffering, continuous manifest suffering. Our manifest suffering is intermittent. In the hells, it is continuous, it is uninterrupted. And secondly, not only is the suffering continuous, but it is also of an intensity that we can't imagine, that's beyond what we experience as a human. And thirdly, the duration is significantly longer than that of a human lifespan. In human years, it would be many thousands of years. So whilst the suffering there is impermanent in that it changes momentarily, and eventually rebirth from there will follow, these many thousands of years that one remains in hell, the suffering is not only intense, but is continuous. There is no respite at all.
디수께 규단 겜매 발로 용고 말 규단 겜래 되네 기고레스 로다 되네게 냐와들 게도 규단 겜래 되네 기고레스 세상 규단 겜 가르레스네 대진년의 셰게 아 저기 체외 삼바 샹리아 심지 지금 소죄 다 되네게 샹기 저게 네 체외 삼바 대소래 체외 삼바 군이라 샹리 체와 제바 체외 레제바 될래 되네 기고레제로 지자당한서 콩로 사제 심진지 현다지리아 체와 제바이나 되는 콩로선 체와 제바들의 슉치죠 몽블리기로 와 베네 심지 쇠베네 베 체와 쇠 군로 심지 쇠베 베 깔레시 나르주 시우지 체와 제 나르주 시우 따베나 깔레 가세 나르주 따베네 아줄리 디버스 체사고래 지자 데네기자 데네기가 저기 체외 삼비의 군내라는 현재 체와 제배 레사바 체외 셈 군내라는 용모바래 디 군내랑 데네 가르쳐서는 체외의 체와 제인 파 자와진의 레사고레스 어디 될 때네 마줄리아는 냐와디 동안 용거에 될 기고래 예제래
Just like our current rebirth came about in dependence on causes, so too do all these rebirths anywhere in the six realms come about in dependence on causes. To be born in the low realms comes about in dependence on unwholesome or non-virtuous causes. And to be born in the great sufferings of the hells comes about in dependence on particularly strong unwholesome causes. In particular, the mind of anger and its potential expression through physical verbal behavior. So the mind of anger So in Tibetan, just this one word anger is used. In English, we have far more adjectives. So we can go from really frustration and annoyance to full rage. So in English, we have this scope of a variety. Tibetan, they just use the one word. So we should understand this word as anger as including the variety of strength. So for anger to have sufficient strength to lead to rebirth such as this, it would be powerful, intense, and perhaps also linked to a particularly maybe you could say vicious form of behavior. So an intense wish to kill, for example. And then also perhaps killing in a way with complete disregard for the pain endured by the being killed. And you could think here particular of death caused by torture. Here, intense pain is being caused, should be manifestly clear to the torturer. Perhaps they're taking pleasure in what they're doing. So here you see an illustration of a particularly intense form of harmful intent and anger leading to credible suffering for others. Such a motivating mind is what is the karma itself, and should that then ripen at the time of death into rebirth into a particular realm, it would be in a realm such as this. So therefore, we come to see how the motivating mind is of such importance.
Dini zang ngang zuki shan le cewe samba dini ki gune la shan le cewa je yung gore. Jeza dini zang da bene juba malak sam se da. Jeza da nyawa je ki yudi ngang zu bezu shine sagdu wa se war da bene juba malak sam se de. Jeza di nyawa dini dunga de kanga dini yore di yudan jen le dini ki gore. Jeza yudan jen di gare la na shan le cewe sembe gune la shan le cewa jibe jawa di di dele dene ki gore di ngang zu ki ji du wa jesa dene ki kanga yongsa dele ngang zu kang zu ne je ki gyu tablam de ngang zu kang zu ne be zu jine ane ngang zu dubu yo ba du wa so da.
The verse concludes with, right now, are you not exerting yourself in the activities that will make such suffering a reality? So here, Gendün Gyatso is exhorting us. Look at our own minds. Look at our own motivations. How often do the afflictions not arise? Do we not, and abide, may be strengthened by a companion of non-virtuous minds, as well as then being expressed. And in this way, we're creating unwholesome karma, which, should it ripen at the time of death as a propelling imprint leading to rebirth, it would be in one of the lower realms. And if it's a particularly powerful unwholesome karma, it would lead to a rebirth even such as this.
Adinima dene lar dada dewa dubichir le dikpa bashi rulenba so loye bardo chwechir se zenduk temba ema sarras.
Moving into the 10th verse. Generally, in order to attain happiness and comfort for this one life, people assiduously strive solely at non-virtuous karma in order to sustain their life for up to just 100 years. Alas, how shocking! It is like relying on poison and demons for nourishment.
Dada dewi tubi shese che digi nganzo digi tubiyaki dewa tubiyaki che do anze karachigora sene di le digbo bashi lulenba digbi ki jawa de bezu shine chigora es or tanga zugi che digi tubiyaki che dalya jidane nganzo ge da che digi tubiyaki che do an digbi lega de digbi lega jangjang bashi se digbi lega bang jangjang anzo bezu shine chigora es lulenba as.
Generally, in order to attain happiness and comfort for this one life, people assiduously strive solely at non-virtuous karma. This we see how it builds on what has been looked at thus far. Striving, being concerned with the happiness and thereby overcoming the problems of merely this one life. People will do, to an extent, whatever it takes. And within what is they deem as justifiable, this encompasses a lot of non-virtuous karma. Speaking in an inappropriate manner, acting in a harmful way, thinking with malicious thoughts and so forth. And this is so often done with energy, almost even with enthusiasm, because due to the deluded way of thinking, it's seen as righteous. In this way, they strive at non-virtuous karma.
ane se zenduk suyo pa kyama tsara sido. Chesa nga zulge denigi dikbi jawa tuwe di tse di lo gyas bardu tuwe ki tuandala ya an jiki denigi tsuwe di bardu tsuwe ki tuandala nga zu bezu jese an dikbi lega jawa mangbu jigo re yese. Chesa di nga zu zenduk sawa da jikba re wa so zenduk se dukchi yoro dukchi nga zu zenduk se dukchi yore di sawa na ane nga zulye chi nugu supola nye tenga sosonga kanga chigo dunga shivu naza shivu chigo ro was che kanga chigo re chesa kanga tegi gyudi zen dukti masaba na nga zo kanga chigi marwa chesa dukti pa saba na tena supola naza tana kanga shivu chigo na tamale so de mewa charu korwa chesa zen dukti nga zo kanga ki gyuyo wa di nashi da zen duk se di nga zo ki di zen duk sawa nashi re esi korda kala se nga zo deji di 디레다 저 콩로 가게 뇽몽베 뇽모 현래 최외 삼바의 전두나시 디베제 땅에도 땅아 주기 최대 대기 주변에 되는 셀로 잘하스바 되게 된다려야 안 저 가르치지 된 거라서 삼로들이야 현래 최외 삼바의 네베 선비 군의 라지 자와 계신 주요도 최외 삼바의 전두나시래 진짜 전두 사바는 아주 동아 강아 지고 디제 디나신 대신일 제바네 세외 선비 군의 라데 뇽모되게 찾아 전두나시래 디 배주 제제 자와 제바에는 아주 찾아 동아지야래스 세상 게마 살아서는 배가소래 뇽모 교육에 삼로 지금 아직 자지올라 여러분다 게마 살아서 디스워다.
The third line, in order to sustain their life for just 100 years, the Zen again makes the point that being blinded by their ignorance, focusing merely on this one life, people are not thinking beyond this life. The great expanse of time from preceding lives to here, as well as lives to follow, being unseen is ignored. Focused just on this short, brief life, beings engage in actions that will cause so much suffering in lives to come. So again, we're being challenged to broaden our perspective, to raise our gaze and see beyond what is right before us and be aware of this expanse of time that we are traversing. And come to recognize that now in the next line, and I'll change based on Gendün's commentary the translation slightly, alas how shocking. It is like relying on powerful poison for nourishment. So the word demons can also be translated as powerful. It is like relying on powerful poison for nourishment. Here, what people were blinded like this, focused on achieving mundane pleasures and overcoming problems which in the greater scheme of things are quite insignificant. They do so by relying on the afflictions. And the afflictions are likened to poison because they poison or pollute or contaminate our motivation. And in particular, when our motivation really is solely poisoned, solely afflicted, only harm will follow. Even if we gain some temporary success, causes that we create will lead to suffering in future lives. Moreover, being afflicted all too often, especially when we're interacting with others, whilst we may get what we want, we often do it at the expense of others being harmed. Here, Gendün Gyatso sees this as shocking, seeing people blinded and in their confusion, thinking they're creating causes for happiness, or really creating causes for suffering.
나 되는 자당 하나 주기 donda 디링 제디 가르친 거라서네 아주 상계 점는 디기 최세 상계 점는 디기 최세디 곧 지키 라마지기 마 송제 델야 잡수치에서 대바잠 제바 니 말에서 그렇다 상계 점는 디기 최세 라마지기 송 델야 대바 지부 대바잠 제대바디 다다 책을 맞춰서 상계 점는 디기 최세디 그래서 그 심주지 우리 예수디 하고 봤지 지금 bên 동아 영화디게 간스 연구하래 디규가르래 겐가르래 그래서 연구를 했어야지 진짜 디바 동아 영화 담보 동아디게 가서 하고 봤지 동아 가르가르도 만줄 동아 가르 돈돌아 가르가르 녀와 발 동아 가르시어래 팔아야 동아 가르시어래 동아디게 쳐서 하고 봤지 다 동아 하고 동아디 안에 유단 겐가르 때는 연구를 했어 유단 겐을 때는 규가르도 겐가르도 파 유단 겐을 파 심주시에 동아의 유단 겐데 야고지 하고 가지 오래스 지산다 동아의 겐나 유단 겐데 하고는 대 규디 매봐서 오고 다 동아 매봐요 저발라 동아의 규디 매봐서 오고 그랬어 다 동아의 규디 매봐서 간데 sö그래 세디 매봐서가 탑람 가르도 세대 심주시에도 지산다 될래 저기 최냠는 제기 아니 가서래 될야 아니 도스체네 냠렌체게 림바티게 안도스체세데 개화줘야 돼. 지나다 데 주발레 때네 맞아 디기디 영화도 규단 끼래 되는 용어. 지나다 디기디 규갈래 되는 용어는 데네 맞아기 대화 내가서 최제발레 되는 용어래서 지나디 규단 끼 도스체네 심죽지 제바체 무인예수디 하고 봐 세명해바니제 무인예수도 하고 해야 되는 무인예수기 특히 야부 영화들이 자와들 배수 제바이나 되는 되게 두고 그래서 안 동아세 두고 그래서 세상 무인예수도 하 먹어 봐지 안 되네게 안지게 되게 두야게 어디제네 되게 연구래 디제네 동아세를 섬직 최소소 제바이나 아니 강하게 대하게 연구를 해서 다 전에 자다 대시 아주 시에대 차상 삼로 따다 삼로 나래야 간스 코고래 삼로 따다 덴데 삼로 덴데 코바이나 아니 디 동아야 규레스 지산디 먼저 삼따다 노바레스 지산디 매바서 고레체 다 삼로 따다 다 덴시 개위 자와 삼따바네 디가 디기 주에 규레스 지산가도 디 고고와 디 냠스 랭고 고레스 디 동아 매바서 디레스 안디 송고레다.
What's being presented in these verses is we are being urged not, as Buddhists, we are being urged not to rely on blind faith. One may have trust in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, but if that trust is veiled or is intermingled with strong ignorance, the faith is blind. This is insufficient. This really is insufficient. We need our mind of refuge to be based on wisdom and particularly experience that has arisen from that wisdom. That is, such a faith is vastly different from blind faith. How to develop faith that is based in wisdom, and the highest form of faith that is based on experience that has arisen from wisdom, comes from thinking for ourselves, based on knowledge. Thinking for ourselves, based on knowledge, leads to a very different faith than blind faith. So as Buddhists, we turn to the three jewels for refuge, or a better translation than refuge is protection. But we need to understand what it is we are looking for protection from, and how to gain protection ourselves. Because in the end, we need to protect ourselves. So what this means is we need to gather knowledge in terms of suffering and its causes. We need to understand what suffering is. We all have an understanding. It's very coarse, but we need to develop a far subtler and more expansive understanding. We have an understanding of the core sufferings of humans and some understanding of the core suffering of animals. We need to understand the sufferings of beings throughout the various realms of samsara, so as to understand that only hoping for a good rebirth is insufficient. We also need to understand the hidden forms of suffering. We have an understanding of the manifest, but are many layers of subtler suffering that are still hidden to us. These we need to come to understand. And this is essential so that we develop a determination to gain freedom from all forms of suffering, not just the coarse forms. With this recognition comes the desire to understand, why do we suffer? And suffering, being impermanent, it comes about in dependence on causes. So the origin of suffering has its causes. Suffering being dependent on causes, one will seek, what are those causes? I don't want to suffer, therefore I do not want to accumulate those causes. This is essential, because this is how we guard our mind. We guard our mind against accumulating the causes of suffering. And as we identify them, we recognize the causes of suffering are not external to us. They are not another person or a situation. They are our own afflictions. In this way we come to recognize firstly suffering, secondly the causes of suffering, our afflictions. From this we'll want to know, can I destroy them? Can I be freed of them? And how to do so. And thereby we have the motivation to seek out the Buddha Dharma, because the state of freedom from suffering is lasting happiness. And how to achieve that is to cultivate the sequence of trainings, the mental paths that lead to a state freed of suffering. So here we now develop a determination to come to understand the Buddha Dharma and to cultivate it within our mind. This leads to a very different mind of refuge, a mind seeking protection, because we understand by cultivating the Dharma within our own mind, we protect ourselves from suffering. This is refuge, this is protection. And to bring this about, we need wisdom or intelligence. We need to understand reality. And here I understand reality in two ways. The main meaning here is actually conventional reality, but also includes ultimate reality. So we need to understand how things work, that this isn't one life. This is not this view of focusing, even if we accept future lives, focusing on just this life. This is not in accordance with reality, with conventional reality. Our focus, when we think about it logically, really should be on future lives. So we need to understand reality. We need to have a way of thinking that is in accordance with reality, so as to overcome all our wrong conceptions. And to do this, we need to gather knowledge, and whilst gathering knowledge, apply it by looking at our own mind, repeatedly over a sustained period, integrating that knowledge through meditation, and thereby transforming our mind. This is the process of Buddhist practice, transforming our own mind.
Samlo nalaya, Shanlia, Tsevi, Samba, and Shala, Neve, Sambagi, Samlo Chena, the Samlo Notures, the Dunga Cures. Then I was dear what the Shanlia, Shanji, never chose and be Samlo Chena, and the Digi Kinjin, Shala never Chigua. Shala never Chigos with Samlo Mena, and the Shala never Chigmarwa. Jesa Deneza, Shala never Chawachi, Samlo de Kuno did that Yomo Passes, Dinga to Dunga Cutires, Digi. Kuni shuk cheche rodo ane shanlia cawachi, shanlia cewi jawal jugores. Ya cewi jawal jugodo, shanlia dunga tigore, soso rarangi dunga nyoye, maomba dunga yoye cewi le sabare. Di nga zo dunga yoye, maomba na dunga yoye gyudi tires. Cheza di meba soya la, 레디 규디 매바서야 마용야라 가르쳐 버려서는 체외 삼바디 파 계시고 말해 까고 그래지로와 제가 다들 가는스 까고 그래라도 가상아도 셰바는 류가 26권에 현래 뇌비자와 체외자와 지금 매세베 삼로 다디래다 디 수름서 지선 수름 송어도 류가 26년 때문에 수름 송어도 현래 체외자와 지기 체외자와 제도의 삼로디 리고 까고 와라 까반자 체외자 제도 군로메도 체외 자와를 주고 말해. 제다다 류가 있으면 예조 때문에 수름 수제 현래 뇌비 체외 자와 뇌비 자와 저기에 삼에 송여도 아니 내가 가르쳐베네 정보지다 현리야 판도 줘봐지다 판마도 많이 봐지고 거다지 네 제도고. 제자디네자 가상아도다 가르쳐 고래스네. 네 완성하게 유 아니 체외 삼바데 가야라 만주기 류가 있으면 예조 때문에 수름 됐어. 두 삼로데 삼로 디게셰 슈처 공고래 공전 뉴버처 땅고래 참 지산 수림도 소바네 수림디 아니 가래 개와치마 하나 미고 화제 귀야 디체고래 아니 탈바다 탐지기면 고방도 귀야 레고래 델라 때네 아니 개위사와 개와 같이네 그 개야 아니 개위 뉴럽 철철로 두고 그랬어. 되네 자당 대기 주비의 귀디 아주 수림송한테 해야지. 어두스는 당 아주 냠는 제어가야지 샘비 토네 아니 류가 있으면 샬란 내가 지금에 샘비 삼로디 야네 양도 삼당 공고를 해야지.
Here we come to recognize that the class of minds, the afflictions, it's these that harm. Well, the afflictions taint our mind, poison our mind, and thereby they harm us immediately. And as to the extent we are habituated to a particular affliction or an afflicted way of thinking, this will readily arise and remain, influence us. And the harm it brings to us is right now, but due to this habituation, will continue to harm us from life to life. Moreover, thinking in a particular way leads to us acting in a particular way, because the way we think motivates our speech and our physical behavior. And in this way, we harm others, both now and through our strengthening habituation in the future. And also, this way of thinking creates an unvirtuous karma, which leads to further suffering in our future lives and restrains our spiritual development, which means that our capacity to benefit others is also impeded by our afflictions. So this we need to recognize. We need to abandon them. These are our true enemy, our soul enemy. All harm towards ourselves and others in this and future lives come from an unwholesome motivation, and a motivation is unwholesome because it has been poisoned by the afflictions. So we need to guard our mind from all afflictions, all minds that bring harm. So the word Genlo is using is not afflictions. He's using minds that bring harm. And this is the way to understand all the afflictions. They bring harm. Not to see them as only harmful if they're very strong. Not to see them as only harmful in certain instances, but in others they are justified. We need to see these as harmful, all of them. So what we need to guard our mind against is being influenced by minds that bring harm, the afflictions. Guarding our mind, protecting our mind from being under the influence of minds that bring harm is a practice of ethical restraint that we looked at briefly yesterday. Restraining the mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions and thereby being ethical. A mind that is ethical will not bring harm to others. We will not speak in a harsh way, a divisive way. if our mind is ethical. Nor will we engage in harmful activities if our mind is ethical. Not only that, regarding our mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions, our mind is calmer, more peaceful. Virtuous, wholesome minds that we all have, therefore, can shine through, because our mind is not poisoned by the afflictions. Love and compassion that we already have will shine through. So too will our wisdom, and thereby our interactions with others will be dominated by wholesome thoughts, and our way of communicating, our way of interacting with others will be wholesome due to the absence of the afflictions. Yesterday, when we briefly looked at the meditation on ethical restraint, I mentioned its results, its benefits. Not only is ethics the primary cause for good rebirth as a human or God, in other words, our own rebirth came from us accumulating causes of ethics in past lives, but secondly, it is the foundation for all virtuous minds. To become a truly loving and compassionate person, to develop great wisdom, all good qualities have as their foundation ethics, because the contrary minds to all good qualities are the afflictions. And it's ethics that guards us from coming under the influence of the afflictions. So therefore, a crucial meditation to engage in repeatedly over a sustained period, whatever meditation practice you have, incorporate the meditation on ethics. And its briefest form, and what can be repeated in quiet moments throughout the day, I will not harm others. Not through my physical behavior, my way of communicating, nor my thought process. By repeating this again and again, that mere line, one is reminded, if my mind is now dominated by the afflictions, attachment, jealousy, anger, pride, this brings harm. Just their arisal, certainly their abiding. Protect my mind, guard my mind. And in this way, we become ethical people. This way, we develop ethical restraint within us.
공묘도 현리아 체외 사바 제기 리고 말에 제가 현심자 좀 동안은 자고도 선비게 삼로지 리오도 아니 현리아 네비 자와다 체외 잡아 차사 아니지 융아 유스미원에 현리아 체외 잡아 자와 제파 가고로 봐 제가 디네에서 잠제 공부이나 잠바단 제와 공부나 니기 아니 랑레 펜바 개와 다디 잠제 공부야디 잠제 디기 랑기 대어 주에게 유조 다 지게 델레드네 장주 셈게다 상지고 보토에 길리고 그래 아니 개와 치마이네 하다 미고 보토에 길리고 그래 아니 소주게 잠제 공부는 샹레 핑고래 아니 샹레 동화되고 막 제가 디네에서 잠제 공부야디 계신보레스 제가도 잠바다 제와 공부이나 샹레 체외 삼발이 말해 샹레 체외 삼발 말에나 체외 삼비 군로메 반사 체위 잡아지기 말해서 제 잡아마잖아 랭아 바사기 말해 되네 동안 연구 말해서 제상은 동안에 타고 타르기래서 제가 동안에 타야게 탑람디 가르고 오세네 수림 능아 있으니 예제되면 수림소야 잠바단 제와 공이야 한 잠제 공부를 아니 가서 진비님은 제하고 제고래서 어두신데 당한 주기 아주 삼로 따당기 삼로 뒷당고 그래서디 아주 시에데 가서는 간제 디레다 잠바다 제와 샬나 티키 주나 선배 삼로디 두쇼 검제네 누버철 당고래서 다시 SM제 탐제 누하다 자고도 자나 선배 삼로디 야 검제 누버철 당고래서 다 융아 26번에 샬라 누비게 체외자와 지금에 선배 삼로디 야네야 다시가 누버철 당고 당아 저게 디기 주비에 유대 소리 상지고 봐 토야다 탈바 고바토에게 규디 디스차고 제가 디양모 pompe 다네 다 디기 뚝뚝거리스 동아 띵이 매바스 뚝거리스 제가 동아 영에 규디 계셔서 매바스 거로 매바스도 안에 동아 영에 매바레스 당아서 삼로 바 예와를 체제 아주 공고에 야게 땅고에 디레스 다 매바스 거기 디소리스 다 예와 체제 디시 송거와
Ethical restraint is the foundation for all good qualities, because an ethical mind is a mind that is not influenced by the afflictions. As they start to arise, with mindfulness, one will apply an antidote and eradicate them. And with this more spacious mind, our own good qualities will readily shine through. And we will have the mental capacity to intentionally, in meditation, develop further good qualities in addition to ethics. Because our mind is not dominated by the afflictions, we can much more easily develop good qualities. And of the many of great importance, love and compassion are essential. I think generating love and compassion for others has a transformative impact on ourselves and our relations with others. The mind of love is the wish for others to have happiness, the happiness of lasting peace. And the mind of compassion is wanting others to be freed of all suffering and its causes. Developing that wish is aided by ethics. Ethics has the same loving and compassionate attitude directly for oneself, not wanting to suffer. One doesn't allow the afflictions to dominate. Oneself wanting lasting happiness. One doesn't allow the afflictions to dominate. So this is expanded now with love and compassion to focus on the needs of others. And we're now with a mind that is not so impacted by the afflictions, we can develop love and compassion for others, wanting them to be freed of all forms of pain and misery. When we have a compassionate attitude towards others, even if an affliction is arising in our mind towards them, we will be guarded now not only by our ethics, but also by our compassion for them. Because if we were to express our affliction to them, we will be adding to their suffering, taking advantage of them, lying to them, or speaking badly about them. Why would we want to add to their suffering? The mind of compassion is wanting others to be freed of suffering. So love and compassion, the cultivation of a kind heart, a tender heart, this comes about on the basis of ethics. It has so many good causes. It leads not only to remarkably good rebirths, but in this life, good relations with others, and a sincere wish to help others and be of benefit to others. And this wish is sincere, not out of a sense of obligation or a sense of social, that it would look bad in society if I didn't, but because one wants to. One sincerely wants this person to have happiness, freedom from suffering. So we see here, with ethics and love and compassion, there's a circular relationship. As we develop ethics, our mind becomes less afflicted, and thereby we can develop love and compassion. As love and compassion grow, our afflictions become weaker, and our ethics becomes more dominant. Because to the extent that love and compassion are manifest within us, how can we bring harm to others? If someone acts to us in perhaps an aggressive manner, if we're feeling love for them, compassion for them, we will not respond in kind. Rather, we will respond under the influence of love and wisdom, and thereby be able to benefit them, with our mind staying ethical, undisturbed by the afflictions, because of the dominance of love. So in this way we see a circular relationship between ethics, love and compassion. So too, with generosity. As all these minds grow, we may meditate on them individually, but they are all entwined. Generosity is the wish to give. as we become more ethical, our own self-interest is reduced because of the lack of the afflictions. As our love and compassion grows, it's a wish to benefit others. This is generosity, giving of ourselves to others, with sincerely wanting to help. This is then the method for eliminating the causes that will lead to suffering. The causes are the afflictions. As we develop ethics, we're guarding our mind from the afflictions. As we're developing love, compassion, and generosity, these are virtuous minds. And to the extent that they are manifest, afflictions cannot arise. And if our afflictions try to, our ethics will guard our mind. So it's the circular relationship of guarding our mind from the causes of suffering. And this is how we start to eradicate suffering.
Benanganzu duloro chine tangbo chik zaba nyu dulo rero chik gabo chine gabo ka yang zangmo zangjiang chorwa da guen ji de chik pa de chik zhwa la chu chin pa chik guen ni guen chin de ni zuo la cha de ni chik ya bo ning jiu le tong go ma ba ande ne za da di zangmo cha liang zu chik ne yi zi da de ne ge jiak ji ya bu zhu wei ne ya ho zangmo cha yong lo ba ji zhe ko ga se ne ko zai wi ko rong zangma 고로 차야기 시주여 반자 아니가 준 상무 책으로 언디 난시 아주 셈나리아 잠제 여러 당아줄 현리아 제외 삼바 현 동안의 전화 선배 삼로 전디기데 덴바스비게 삼로 잠제 여러 아주길라 이나디 뉴버 첨부 차두고 말해 아니 아주 류마 이숨 예주 체외 삼바지기 체와 지금에 선배 삼로 추림대 충충 여러 데 아주 뉴버 첨부 차두고 말 가서는 요몽바디기 바 나도 되샤 콩로 나제 요몽 방부 지파 삼로디기 바 둠지도 고바 뉴메를 써야래 당 아주 같이 오르는 최제세디 두로 쥐디 쥐요도 고 제가도 마다도 까보디야 야 두고로 봐 어디나시 아주기 요몽바 체외 삼바데 요몽바디 마 같이 투두마 마마 까바이네 매바서요도 내가 아주기 계획 삼로디기 베네 다 추림 융아이 예주드메 추련다 잠바제와 디마 두슈처처저 루고 제자다 상기 고마 톱시디 아주 셈디 뇨모 브릭사본 바사다 제바 매바 장마 쇠샤바나 아주 상기 차루고 마도 상기 세디 아주 제샤지 샹다치니 케제 아주 상기 쇠스 가요 말에 딱 아주기 셈기 아주 셈디 뇨모바 막보여 디 뇨모바데 바 매바쇠 디 뇨모바게게 사본디게 매바 디 바샤다 제바 차상 매바쇠반 아주 셈디 상기 20추구세야 디 가상 셰바나신 상기기 근데 20추구세 최고래 그래서 최고 그래서 다 상기 아주 상기에다 쇠디 아주 유심이 땡게 뇨모바다 디 사본디게 파 매바쇠 장모쇠야 돼 장모쇠는 아주 셈디 야야야야 조고거든요 탈바다 탐지기 보고 와 타냐냐체 되는 배코로 바샤데저 배겨 장모쇠지 망원반의 윤의 양계 용의 매바쇠바네 대 톱소나 되는 상기 세 차버 되는 상기 권조 세가도 상기 권조 차버 권조 숨게나네 상기 권조다 기능 권조다 최 권조세 차상 강조를 내려야 된다.
When you've bought new clothes, perhaps something white, you know that wearing it very quickly it gets a little bit grubby. But you also know that that's okay. Depending on the mark, you maybe just apply a bit of soap and soak it, and then put it in the washing machine, and it will come out clean as new. This you know, because you know that the dirt is not in the very nature of the cloth, and therefore it can be removed. So too, with our mind, the afflictions, all the afflictions, anger, attachment, ignorance, all of them are not in the nature of our mind. Moreover, wholesome minds, virtuous minds, such as love, compassion, and ethics, these we do have. They are weak though, and they're weak and lack strength due to our lack of habituation to them. And we can see our lack of habituation to them because they do not dominate our mind. They are not routinely manifest. They don't spontaneously arise with ease unless there's a specific and obvious cause. But the afflictions, we're much more habituated to them. We get annoyed with the smallest of reasons. We get attached to the slightest of things. But the afflictions are not in the nature of our mind, which means through these meditations that are presented, we both reduce the strength and frequency of the afflictions and develop our virtuous minds. Because what we are trying to do is change habituation from the afflicted side to the wholesome side, one needs to engage in the process of hearing teachings and reflecting on them repeatedly over a sustained period. This is how we develop habits. We're trying to develop an habitual way of thinking, hence the need for repeated meditation, a daily practice, and a reminder of what we meditated on briefly throughout the day. We are trying to develop new habitual ways of thinking and break other habitual ways of thinking. So this is the process we need to engage in. And by continuing, we are, just like the cloth, we are purifying our mind, cleansing it of stains. And at the same time, we are developing good qualities. There is a proportional relationship. As we weaken our afflictions, we develop good qualities. As we develop good qualities, our afflictions weaken. This is Buddhist practice. And its result, that we all eventually will attain, is we all become Buddhas. Because a Buddha is a being who has completed this process. The term Buddha is sometimes accompanied by the adjective of a complete Buddha or complete enlightenment. Complete refers to having completely purified the mind and completely developed all good qualities. In the same way, the Buddha is also called perfected for the same reason. And this mind of ours that we currently have, this mind that is being slowly purified through our training and good qualities slowly developed, that self-same mind is what will arise as the Dharmakaya, or the truth body. And of the two divisions of the truth body, it's the wisdom truth body. So this is something we've looked at in recent weekends. But this mind, our subtle mind, we all have within us. And therefore, by engaging in this process of meditation repeatedly over a sustained period, we will arise as the Dharmakaya. We will become a Buddha. This is the process. When we rise as a Buddha, we arise as the actual three jewels of refuge. We become the Buddha jewel. We give rise to the Dharma jewel, the actual Dharma jewel in our own continuum, or the perfected Dharma jewel in our own continuum, and we also become an illustration of the Sangha jewel. This way, we become the perfect three, the actual three jewels ourselves. So they're talking about our own innate potential. We'll finish for this morning. Thank you very much.